Hello everyone, welcome to another series of Mind Map. In today's episode, we will cover the economy subject and the topic is World Trade Organization. First of all, we will discuss about early days of trade, the 𝐃𝐫𝐢𝐬𝐡 years, birth of WTO, WTO organizational structure, its objectives and principles, WTO agreements and reforms required. First of all, let's discuss about early days of trade. In the 3rd century BC, during the Han Dynasty, China used its military power to maintain the Silk Route for its value for trade. In the year 30 BC, Rome conquered Egypt in large part to have a better supply of grain. From the Silk Road to 𝐃𝐫𝐢𝐻, that is General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, to the WTO, trade has played an important role in supporting economic development and promoting peaceful relations among nations. Trade and foreign policy have been intertwined throughout history, with foreign policy often tailored to promote trade interest. To regulate the global trade, on 30 October 1947, the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, or 𝐃𝐫𝐢𝐻, was signed by 23 nations at the Palace of Nations in Geneva. The agreement contained tariff concessions agreed to during the first multilateral trade negotiations. It also had a set of rules designed to prevent these concessions from being frustrated by restrictive trade measures. Now moving on to the 𝐃𝐫𝐢𝐻 years. 1948 to 1994. 𝐃𝐫𝐢𝐻 provided the rules for much of the world trade and presided over periods that saw some of the highest growth rates in international commerce. It seemed well established, but throughout those 47 years, it was a provisional agreement and organization. 𝐃𝐫𝐢𝐻 helped establish a strong and prosperous multilateral trading system that became more and more liberal through rounds of trade negotiations. But by the 1980s, the system needed a thorough overhaul. This led to the Uruguay round and ultimately to the WTO. Now let's discuss about birth of WTO. WTO, that is World Trade Organization, came into existence in 1985, headquartered in Geneva. It covered almost all trade from toothbrushes to cruise boats, from banking to telecommunications, from the genes of wild rice to AIDS treatments. It was quite simply the largest trade negotiation ever and the most probably the largest negotiation of any kind in history. 𝐃𝐫𝐢𝐻 also continues as WTO's umbrella treaty for trade in goods. WTO is an organization for liberalizing trade. It's a forum for governments to negotiate trade agreements and to settle trade disputes. WTO is a place where member governments go try to sort out trade problems they face with each other. It's a negotiating forum. The bulk of the WTO's current works comes from the 1986 to 1994 negotiations called the Uruguay round. The WTO is currently the host to new negotiations under the Doha Development Agenda launched in 2001. Now moving on to its organizational structure. The WTO has 164 members accounting for 98% of world trade. A total of 25 countries are negotiating membership. Decisions are made by the entire membership by consensus. A majority vote is also possible, but it has never been used in the WTO and was extremely rare under the WTO's predecessor, the GATT. The WTO's agreements have been ratified in all members' parliaments. Ministerial Conference. It is the WTO's top-level decision-making body which meets usually every 2 years. General Council looks after day-to-day work of WTO, which also meets as the trade policy review body and the dispute settlement body. At the next level, the Goods Council, Services Council and Intellectual Property, that is TRIPS Council, report to the General Council. Now let's discuss about its objectives and principles. WTO aims to establish free trade in the world for global growth. It aims to ensure trade without discrimination through Most Favored Nation or MFN. Treating other people equally under the WTO agreements, countries cannot normally discriminate between their trading partners. grant someone a special favor and you have to do the same for all other WTO members. National treatment, treating foreigners and locals equally. Imported and locally produced goods should be treated equally, at least after the foreign goods have entered the market, to reduce extreme poverty to 3% by 2030. It promotes competitiveness by discouraging unfair practices such as export subsidies and dumping products at below cost to gain market share. More benefits for the less developed countries, and the WTO agreements permit members to take measures to protect not only the environment but also public health, animal health and plant health. Now let's have a look at the WTO agreements. General Agreement on Tariff and Trade, that is GATT. The agreement deals with trade in goods. General Agreement on Trade and Services, or GATS. It is the first agreement on multilateral trade in services. Next is Trade-Related Intellectual Property Rights, that is TRIPS Agreement. It refers to legal protection given for certain time period for some original work done in different field. Next is TRIMS, that is Trade-Related Investment Measures. This agreement recognizes that certain investment measures can restrict and distort trade and thus should be prohibited. SCM, that is Agreement on Subsidies and Countervailing Measures. WTO tries to control the subsidies to make the trade free and fair. Agreement on Agriculture. Under this agreement, agricultural trade was brought under rules of multilateral trading system for the first time. Its purpose was to liberalize agricultural trade for the benefit of WTO members, particularly developing countries having comparative advantage in agriculture. Agreement on Agriculture has three important clauses: improvement in market access, export competition, and reduction of domestic subsidies. Trade Facilitation Agreement, or TFA, was the outcome of WTO's 9th Bali, Indonesia Ministerial Package of 2013 and came into force from February 2017. We will discuss TRIPS and Agreement on Agriculture in details in other videos. Now let's discuss about reforms required. WTO is facing an existential crisis and its main functions are eroding. Its rule-making function must be revised to govern the current trading environment. Its dispute settlement system, particularly the appellate body, has been deadlocked. The impasse must be resolved. Further, this body, which can pass judgments on disputes, lacks the powers to enforce them, as the enforcement of decisions is left to individual member states. While initially envisaged as a global body to promote free trade, the WTO has now deteriorated into a forum where competing governments fiercely try to protect their narrow interest. Leading stakeholders have presented several reform proposals. However, the main challenge comes from systematic issues embedded in the geopolitical rivalry. The reform is not an easy process in a member-driven institution where consensus is strictly required. Now it's time for the practice questions. First of all, note down the prelims question that was asked in 2017 exam also. Question is, consider the following statements. 1. India has ratified the Trade Facilitation Agreement of WTO. 2. TFA is a part of WTO's Bali Ministerial Package of 2013. 3. TFA came into force in January 2016. Which of the statements given above is or are correct? 1 and 2 only, 1 and 3 only, 2 and 3 only, or 1, 2 and 3? You can send the answer of this question in the comment section. Now moving on to the mains question. World Trade Organization, or WTO, as a multilateral body is facing challenges on various counts. In this light, discuss the relevance of WTO and also suggest suitable reform in its functioning. So that's all for today. Stay tuned for the next episode. Stay happy, stay motivated.